Collins. Welcome to Writer's Reading. This program is brought to you as a public service presentation of WPRG TV5, Harold, Kentucky. Once again today we're at the York Mansion in Pikeville, and we have as our special guest Mr. Ken Kinder. Mr. Kinder is the grandson of William McKinley Justice, and he's going to read for us from Mr. Justice's book, Take Time to Stroll. But before he does that, I'd like to read you a little bit about William McKinley Justice. William McKinley Justice, born 1893, died 1968, an educator in Pike County schools almost 50 years, was sometimes called the Poet Laureate of Pike County. His two daughters inherited his writing talent. Jessie Justice Brown of Orlando, Florida, is a poet, has had her poetry published in national magazines, and is the author of Pebble on the Sand. Alice Justice Kinder has written several books and writes for the Appalachian News Express. William M. Justice began writing in his teen years. Through the years, his work was published in national educational magazines, anthologies, and newspapers. A patriotic poem of his was read by Adlai Stevenson before the United Nations Assembly. His poetry was read over radio stations in Chicago and other northern cities. He gave lectures on his poetry at leading universities. He was the author of 5 published books of poetry: Tears and Laughter and Other Poems, A Man, a Woman, and God, Acorns of Gold, This Way Lies Peace, and Take Time to Stroll. As I said, Ken Kinder here is going to read from Take Time to Stroll.
Thank you. The first poem I want to read is Pikeville Town. I saw it first when I was almost 10, and that was more than 80 years ago, when 500,000 souls inhabited this spot of bottomland. I had been told about this place, how wonderful it was, with stores and all. I'd heard the town clock strike on quiet mornings when life scarcely moved. I'd even seen it from the high pinnacle. I'd heard the steamboats whistle too. They brought the goods from down below, so merchants would have things to sell to people when they came to Pikeville Town. There was no railroad then. Old people said there'd never be one along Big Sandy's banks, and yet, our crystal river flowed and rose and fell, and bore the screaming steamboats to and from fair Pikeville Town. Our virgin trees were felled and rafted and were floated down to where the Big Sandy River meets the Ohio. No more do they adorn our river's banks, our hill slopes and our valleys, and conserve our precious water that of late comes down from mine-torn land in awful, fearful floods. I'm sitting on a bench in this fair park in Pikeville Town. The sound of traffic comes from all about. The people come and go. They are racing somewhere, nowhere, everywhere. The railroad cars go rolling, rolling on, heaped high with precious tons of our king coal. I fear none will be left some future time. Down at the corner of this park there stands a marker telling us that in the year of 1862, Garfield was here in Pikeville Town with his brigade. The quaint old mansion on the porch of which he stood when he was made a general has been laid low, but still the footsteps of his brave, brave men are marching on, ever with steady step through Pikeville Town. I still sit on the bench in this fair park. It is late afternoon. The yellow leaves are scattered here and there upon the grass. Autumn is almost here. Late autumn rains, afresh within my lonely heart. I feel so out of step and out of tune with life, as it is lived in our torn world today. Would it were morning once again, and I were listening to the town clock strike, and to the whistle of the steamboats, would my world were small as it were then, and would I had the whole thing by the tail, and would that I were taking it downhill with merry heart and mighty speed, down to God knows where. Would it were morning, early morning now.
It's a lot different from Pikeville now, huh?
Right, quite a bit different. In fact, Pikeville's quite a bit different from when Grandpa wrote this poem. The second poem that I would like to read is kind of a humorous poem. My grandfather had different styles that he wrote in, and he was good in humor. The Wonder in the Sky. This was written shortly after many of us Kentucky mountaineers saw an airplane for the first time. The preacher had told us of the great and awful day when the Lord should descend in his chariot and bear his elect away to a river of milk and honey, full as its banks could hold, and a street with gates all pearly, and streets of purest gold. He had warned us and warned us and warned us of the awful place called hell, where the lost in the sight of God's angels forevermore should dwell, and had urged us to make preparation to escape that dreadful fate, lest the angel come without warning and pronounce the words too late. Yes, and he had warned us further that the time was near at hand, that we might look at any minute and see the angel stand, with one foot upon the dry land and the other upon the sea, and swear with his hand toward heaven that time should no longer be. He could prove it, he said, by the scriptures that were all well nigh fulfilled. Just look at the new inventions and the blood that is being spilled over yonder across the waters, the increase in learning and all. I tell you, you may watch any moment for this old world to fall. And there came a time in our history, not overly long ago, when many here in our mountains believed it was all so. 'Twas in the early morning, the 4th day of July, this coming of our first airplane, the Wonder in the Sky. Uncle Abe hustled into his coal bank and cried for the slate to fall in. When it didn't happen, he prayed this scared prayer, "Good Lord, forgive my sin." Aunt Julie screamed and pleaded, "Sweet Jesus, what shall we do?" And old Sister Peggy fainted as fast as they'd fetch her too. But at last the tumult subsided. The Wonder dipped and whirled and floated off toward the city, saying never a word. Then we all came to our senses, and I'm willing to bet my last dime that preachers in our ships will find it much harder to fool us next time.
That's cute.
Yeah, my grandfather lots of times said that preachers sometimes were so narrow you could fit 4 of them in a bed. But he was a pretty religious man in his own way. He wasn't very orthodox in his religion, hardly ever went to church. But he was a very religious man. And the next poem, He Made Them All, I think will show this. He made the universe of many things, such as electrons, atoms, you and me, the silver rain, the little bird that sings his loving heart out in my highest tree, the stars that trail with steady, measured pace along their orbits, stray not out of bounds. He made and set each upon its race. His eye guides it in its eternal rounds. To him no thing he made is large or small. Each has its part to play. Each has its charms. For him who planned and made and loves them all, and holds them in his everlasting arms. The last poem that I would like to read of my grandfather's is Playing My Cards. And this book was published not too long before he died, and I kind of feel that he felt that he didn't have too much longer to live on this earth. Playing my cards. When I came on this earthly scene, I had some cards to play. Whether I've played them well or ill, who's wise enough to say? How many cards remain to me, I have no way of knowing. Suffice that God is merciful, as my last cards are going. I trust He'll see that as I am of cards bereft, I play each one as if I had but one card left.
Well, if he followed that, he's a pretty wise man.
Yes, I feel my grandfather was a very wise man, but the main thing that I remember about him, he was a good man. He cared about people.
Well, I know he was a very talented man. You've showed us that today. And I want to thank you for coming, Ken, and reading from your grandfather, William M. Justice. And maybe sometime you can come back and do it again.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. I want to thank Dr. Don also for allowing us to come to you today. Until next week, may God bless you.